Yep.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom and welcome. I'm looking at the notes and I see that Joanne and some of our friends who are in the storm's path are saying they're going to stay with us as long as they can, as long as they have power. So hopefully you'll be able to stay with us. If not, you can watch it later. Hopefully you won't lose power. I mean, we could hope that. So we also know that because of all the storms that we've been through here, that sometimes that happens. So, right. Yep, it's Joanne said the three wise men. This is an all boys show today. In fact, Joanne, if your power goes out, it's okay. It's a men only show anyway today.
That's right.
I'm just picking. But welcome to our class today. I assume that many of you saw the teaching earlier, and now we're doing our dialogue, our discussion. And we'll talk about some of these things. Again, what I did today was a little bit different. I know that. I've touched on this before, but I realized in previous swings at this that it requires more than one class. It's an ongoing study, and we're looking for ways to ascertain within the text what is the Torah that God gave Moses, and what are the other things. So you know this, and I'll cover this in more depth later, but this is an example of the traditional view. This is from my prayer book, but it's called Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers. This is what it says. The traditional view is this. Moses received the Torah at Sinai, handed it on to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, elders to the prophets, prophets handed it on to the men of the great assembly, and they said three things, and then it goes into their teachings. So the idea is that there is a continual chain, a chain of transmission from Moses all the way down to the present day. I'm not saying anything differently. The question becomes, and this is what we notice in the text, is that there are places within the text which are communicated in first person, almost like a narrative that's like you would, if we went on a trip together, we've done this before, Dave, and I wrote down, or you wrote down every detail, and then we left, and then I went into the store and paid for the gas, and then Dave did this, and, you know, it's, now if John heard about our trip and said, Dave and Ross went to a trip together, Dave told me that he went into the store and paid for the gas.
Yeah. And the counter said this to Dave.
Or in some cases, John could be sitting in the back seat recording the conversation between you guys.
You could. That's right. That's another way that this narrative comes together.
I get back in there, they say, you asked me, what did the counter guy say? And I tell you what he says, and you wrote down what he said.
That's right. Yep. So there are ways that this comes together. I'm not putting discredit on any of this. Here's what I'm not doing.
Okay.
I'm not saying that this, you know, like people will hold. I grew up Southern Baptist, so this would have been a King James Bible, and you know, in my upbringing, and I was told this is the inspired, authoritative, inerrant Word of God. Every word of this is God breathed and
written by the hand of God.
Written by. And you became indoctrinated to think that way. What I'm saying now is all of this can be the property entrusted to the people of Israel. It can represent many things. Within this book called the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, we have history, we have prophecy, we have prose and poetry, we have songs, we have all of these things. And so wisdom literature, we have to be able to assess what it is that we're reading, and is it a first-person account, or did someone else write this? So let me do one more example, and then I'll open it up for some questions. Okay. Deuteronomy begins this way. All right, here we go. Guess where it begins? Chapter 1, verse 1. Right?
The words of
These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan, in the wilderness, over against Suf, between Paran and Tophel and Lavan and Hatzerot and Dizahav. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. And it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all that Jehovah had given him in commandment to them, after he had slain Sihon the king of the Amorite, who dwelt in Heshbon, and Og the king of Bashan, who dwelt in Ashtaroth in Edrei, beyond the Jordan in the land of Moab. Here we go. Moses began to declare this Torah, HaTorah Hazot, saying, now watch it switch. Jehovah our God spoke to us in Horeb. Watch this. Let's say, how can I do this? I want to illustrate this. Okay. Can you follow me with the camera, Dave? Mm-hmm. So I can get up
I
and
do. Go there, yeah.
Yeah, if you go over there, so stick with me.
So it's all about me on television.
No, you're going to be the narrator. But I don't need you on screen. I want you to read with a good voice now. Read like Charlton Heston or something.
Now we're going to go to blank screen for a second. To the green screen.
Where are you going?
I gotta get my glasses.
Oh, he doesn't have his glasses.
It's not in Braille.
That you're why it says in Deuteronomy 29 verse 4, to this day you don't have eyes to see.
That's right.
That's a prophecy fulfilled. Okay, here we go. Now, when I tell you stop, you got to be able to work with me on this. All right, here we go.
You want me to start at the beginning?
In chapter 1, verse 1.
All right. These are the words which Moshe spoke to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan.
Stop. These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel. Where?
On the other side of the Jordan. The Jordan.
Right?
Yes.
So wait a minute. Whoever is saying that is saying these are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan. So where is that written? Here's Moses. Now I'm going to be Moses just for a minute. Because Moses is fixing to say, the director is going to say, go Moses. So I'm Moses, and I'm ready for the scene to begin, and a narrator's voice said, because I'm on the other side of the Jordan. Look, you know what's over here? The land of Israel, the promised land. I didn't mean to jump out the screen like that. I just got excited. So whoever is writing this is on this side of the Jordan. They're
in Israel.
In the land.
In the land, yes.
You get it?
Yes.
So the writer here, it's not Moses, because did Moses ever come to this side of the Jordan? No. No, he didn't go in. We just spent a whole day talking about it. No, you're not going in, Moses. So Moses isn't the one writing that, but whoever is writing this, what John just read, is on this side of the Jordan. And he says, these are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan, and Moses is back on the other side. Go.
That's correct. In the wilderness, over against Surf, between Paran and Tophel, and Lavan, and Hazarot, and Dishva. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. And it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moshe spoke to the children of Israel according to all that the Lord had given him in commandment to them, after he had slain Sihon the king of Amorite, who dwelt in Heshbon, and Og the king of Bashan, who dwelt in Ashtaroth in Edrei, beyond the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moshe began to declare this Torah, saying,
Stop. The narrator's voice is different than my voice. Everybody get that? The narrator, John in this case, is telling a story. He's on the other, I want to drill this home, he's on the other side of the Jordan, and he, whoever it is, did cross over, or is there whenever this is written, and he's giving a lead-in, an introduction, an appendage to, a preamble to what is to follow. And so what we have to do is we have to look, it's almost like, and he said, he began to speak this Torah. This is key, I'm telling you. I'm going to get into this next week. I may do the same little skit because I want people to get that he's saying this Torah, and then what happens? It is this Torah.
Let me help you out. Let's forget everything I just read and what you just said. I'm going to read. The Lord our God spoke to us in Horeb, saying, you have dwelt long enough in the mountain. Turn and... So, you don't know where I'm talking from. If you were there when I said it, you would know exactly where I was standing because you were there listening to it. But 100 years down the road, or 20 years down the road, with the next generation, who's going to know where I said this? You see what I'm saying?
We're ready.
And that's
Dave.
what
You
he
come
wanted.
join us.
That's what they were trying
We're going
to
to zoom back to the table, and I'm going to take this right here.
Okay.
So
Did I steal your thunder?
No. No. What I wanted to make clear, though, is beginning with, after it says, Moses began to make plain or declare HaTorah Hazot, saying. All right? In Hebrew, it's very clear. Then began Ho'il Moshe be'er et HaTorah Hazot lemor. The narrator is introducing what is to follow, and what is to follow is, it's like he takes this introductory paragraph. What does he have in front of him? This Torah, the one that Moses began to. So he's got this document with, the current book of Deuteronomy has 34 chapters. What we've got is some of the material within Deuteronomy is narrators and so forth. So we just have to discern between the two. Now, once you get to this point, Moses begins to speak first person. Jehovah our God spoke to us in Horeb. It's almost like Moses is speaking this first person to the people who are there, and you follow it all the way through. And the interesting thing is that I began to notice this. I read great books. I have great teachers. But at the same time, as I carefully noted how things are communicated, it became obvious that not everything is recorded in the first person. I gave some of that today. I'll go into more of that next week.
Obviously, Moses passed on, and somebody was writing this, and they referred back to what Moses said.
Yeah,
and it's real simple.
So
the issue is that we in our mind think that we got this picture. Because we think in pictures of Moses getting the Torah, and that's it, And we don't really think about Moses is already gone; he's dead, and he's still writing. That's where our brain tells us.
Yeah.
Somehow that happened.
Well, when you get to that last section where Moses said, "Okay, I'm done now."
Yeah.
Period. End of my discussion.
Yeah.
But what he did is like, okay.
But the Torah went on.
But there's a few people sitting around here, right? And I say, okay, I'm done. This is my story. I'm finished with it. And then I go, Bob the Levite, take this and put it in a side. This is an aside.
Yeah.
And Bob the Levite, or Joshua, or whoever it was, said, we need to mention this. Take this and put it in the side panel of the ark.
The Torah of Moses
right.
is that we read about in Deuteronomy 31 today. Moses finishes writing it in Deuteronomy 31. It says he rolls it up.
Yep.
Now, we're not finished with the Torah.
Right.
He rolls it up. He hands it to our Levites.
To
Right.
Torah 1.0.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Torah
Torah
1. This is the Torah.
Yeah.
It is the Torah. It's called this Torah, HaTorah Hazot. I'm writing this down. I'm doing my research paper on this. So he gives this. It doesn't contain some of these other things that we have. Now, somebody might go, well, how do I know what is what it? It becomes obvious as we read it, I believe. But he hands it. Now, the Levites are tasked with a chore or a task, a noble task, to take that, and they are to keep that and preserve it, and so forth and so on. Now, ultimately, where I'm going, and we'll get into this over the next couple of weeks, is the discovery of this Torah. This scroll is discovered in a very holy place in the time of Josiah. It becomes the absolute bedrock truth, and when it's read in the hearing of the king, and then the king reads it to the people, it leads to repentance and teshuva.
Just to clarify, when you say this Torah, which one which?
The Torah, the one that Moses wrote.
The one he rolled up.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So let me show you
the pre Joshua.
Here is my current working. I guess I can have a working theory.
Sure.
This sheet of paper represents the Torah that God gave Moses, that Moses recorded. He finished it in Deuteronomy 31.
Gotcha.
He rolled it up like this.
He went on up the mountain.
And he said, put this in the side of the ark.
Gotcha.
And the Levites do. They put it in beside Aaron in the side of the ark. Mm-hmm. Now, over time, this is maintained, but there are other stories, sacred history, real events,
and even oral.
Yeah, but I want to stick with this. I want to say these are God ordained, inspired stories. I'm not taking away from that. Let's say you have quite a few, because who's supposed to keep that record? The Torah tells us who's supposed to keep that record. And within these holy, sacred stories and events about the patriarchs and all these other things, look.
Put it right there next to it.
See that?
Let's think about this rationally for a second. For 400 years.
Has it come to that?
Yeah. For 400 years, this group of people were enslaved. They didn't go to school. There was no schooling. They worked from sun up to sundown, and sometimes after that. They worked 7 days a week. There was no break. They were mistreated for the most part. Some weren't, but for the most part. So where is, other than, when you come in out of a mud pit or out of the desert or wherever you were and fall down to get some rest and a bite of bread and some water, because, you weren't like, having a turkey dinner or something. They didn't have turkeys over there. But anyway, and there were no chickens running around the desert. But anyway, the point is there was not this transfer of the history of the people. Okay. And so at some point in time, this is my supposition, that during that 40-year period, I believe, this is John's belief, this is not in the book, that history was re-unfolded to the Israelites so that they understood where they came from and where they were going to.
So let me jump in, because
and it could have very well been from Moses imparting that information. Somebody wrote it down.
There are a lot of ideas that people have about how did we get the current. Let's just talk about Torah and not the books of the prophets and the writings and so forth. But there are a lot of things that are written on this subject. Some believe, that the Torah as we have it, the general consensus among scholars. And I want to get into this with people so that they're informed and they know about this. Generally, people don't know this. I talk to people who think they know it and they say they know it, but in about 2.5 minutes, you realize they don't understand the academic view of how we got the Torah. They just immediately say, and I'm not saying I believe it or don't, I'm just saying that I've seen this. They immediately, without expressing any knowledge of it, say, well, that didn't happen because those guys are liberal theologians and they don't believe in the authenticity of the Torah, and therefore anything they say is suspect. What I did several years ago was I said, I want to look at and explore every bit that I can find on this subject, and I began to look at some things. And now, again, some people say, well, this is what happened. Here's the way we know this, and they come up with their own ideas, and say this. What I prefer to do is say, what evidence from the text do we have, and there is some, about how we got what we have today. And
Gotcha.
So when I focus on the Torah, and I read, for instance, in Deuteronomy 31 that Moses finishes writing the Torah unto its end, and in Hebrew it's called specifically, that was your question a minute ago, this Torah.
Mm-hmm.
He finished writing HaTorah Hazot unto its end until it was completed, rolled it up, he hands it, and then the story continues. So, based on that, that's our first clue, and on some obvious things in the narration. Like whenever I read Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, it is apparent to me that that is not part of what Moses rolled up. Right?
Mm-hmm.
In what Moses rolls up in Deuteronomy 31, it's a narrative. It did not say, now after, I'm in Joshua now, it didn't say, these are the words which Moses spoke unto all Israel on the other side of the Jordan. It didn't say that. I don't believe, not the original. That was put in later, as I understand it. Somebody says, you don't know that. There's a common belief among fundamentalists today that every word in Deuteronomy, let's just stick with Deuteronomy, is God told Moses, write this. Are you ready? And Moses said, yes, Lord, I'm ready. And he goes, these are the words which Moses spoke unto all Israel. And see, you'd picture Moses writing. Some people believe that that's the case. And likewise, at the end of Deuteronomy, where it says, so Moses, the servant of the Lord, died in the land of Moab. They believe that I don't believe Moses wrote that.
No.
This becomes problematic, and what begins to happen is fundamentalists who believe in the inerrancy of the Word of God begin to say, wait a minute. Moses died and was buried, and we have a record of that. Who wrote that?
Right.
And so they say, well, it had to be Joshua, because Joshua took over. I mean, it's as good a guess as any.
Sure. Could have been Bob the Levite.
But it could have been someone else. We don't know.
That's right.
And I don't know that we need to know. I don't know that we...
It's not important.
It could be very, very important, maybe, but it's not... It doesn't take away most of these statements that I'm discussing and that I will discuss add to the clarity of the text, and they give us context.
But Moses recorded earlier in there that God said, you ain't going.
Yep.
You're going to die, and this is,
these
come up here, take a look. And Moses recorded all that. And basically, the way I take it at the end, Bob the Levite or whoever, Joshua, wrote down there, and in point of fact,
God
Moses
did tell
did
Moses
die.
He wasn't going in.
Yeah, and he did die there, and God took care of that, and we never saw him again.
The fact that it's not written down specifically who wrote what, when, and all that good stuff. This is actually a tool. This information can be a tool to counter. A lot of atheists use these texts to say that couldn't possibly happen.
Right.
Moses couldn't. He how do you know what happened?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a way of describing actually how the Torah. I'm gonna use the word evolved here.
Yep.
But
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Let's
it's
do something.
tool.
Let's do a little something else. So, let's say, for instance, I'm Bob the Levite, and I wrote that down. I'm just throwing that out there. Now, back in the day, we'll go only back to the time of of Jesus. Now, people didn't have last names. And Moses was a heck of a lot earlier than that,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So you had like Joseph or Joshua or whoever. And there was like, in 200,000 people, there were probably 10,000 Josephs. So what was it? It was Joseph, Jesse's son or whatever. So, I mean, but there was probably a few of them. So why would you, if you were recording this and you were the official person that's designated to record this, they probably wouldn't sign their name. You see what I'm saying? Because nobody would know who it was a generation afterwards. Anyway.
Well, I think one of your points is in the ancient world, quite often, especially in Scripture, we see, well, like in this particular Torah portion, it refers to Hosea, son of Nun.
Right.
Okay, so we know who he is. He's
Right.
Hosea, the son of Nun. Who was Hosea's dad? Nun. Right? So you go, okay, well, I know. So technically, they did have ways of designation,
Sure.
or it could be sometimes they would use where the person is from or his ethnicity. Uriah the Hittite. I mean, we have ways of identifying, but the
Those are
point
for the
of
more
fact,
important people, though.
But the point of fact, well, everybody was probably called in antiquity by the family name or something.
Yeah.
But there were nicknames. Like, I'll give you another example. At Masada, when they discovered the lots that were cast, for the story that we know from Josephus, what they actually found were 10 lots that inscribed on them were nicknames of people. So people, just like in our day, they had nicknames. It might be Bubba or Slim or whatever. So we had all these, but to your point, I think, about the text itself, critical scholarship says we don't have they call it an autographed version.
Yeah, we don't have the original documents.
How many scribes back in ancient times, whether it was Babylonian or Egyptian or whoever, how many of the scribes actually signed their names to documents?
Well, I'm sure we can find that information.
They may have, but what I'm saying is, you're a scribe. Your job is you transpose or you write down what I tell you and hand it back to me.
We have records of it passed down, but we don't have the original.
Oh, who did?
But we do know, for instance, of the work of scribes in the biblical period. Baruch is a good example. We have in the book of Jeremiah, we know that his scribe is a person by the name of Baruch, the son of Neriah. And they've actually even discovered his impression, his seal impression. So we know more than what a lot of people think we know. We do know quite a bit, and there is evidence to support the veracity of the Hebrew Bible. So I want people to understand what I'm not doing is casting doubt or trying to make people say, well, I don't know what I believe anymore.
Man's got his hands in it, man. This could be messed up. I don't trust it.
So we have to trust. When we approach, there is an element of faith. But for instance, the letter of Jeremiah, as we've received it, the book of Jeremiah, which contains letters, plural, we know that because of certain evidences within the text that Baruch is his scribe, that he writes these. In fact, we have stories where it says, and I had Baruch write this down and whatever. So we know that, and we know in antiquity that the scribes were a very prestigious, it was a very important task. First of all, you're writing holy things.
Right. It was a way to get out of manual labor type stuff. Not to get out of it, I'm just saying.
I know how to write.
I could
well,
write.
Every king had a room full of scribes.
Yeah, they were the, using another term I don't like, upper class.
Yeah.
Class, I don't like classes, but well-to-do, their children would learn to read and write, or the priest, you'd have that also in there.
Well, that and the pharaohs had the same thing. What I'm saying is every king in that era, in that time frame, had scribes. It's just that, yes, sometimes you can identify who the scribe was, but sometimes you can't. The important part is
we have to be able to be honest, and when we don't know, we don't speculate on it.
We don't know
if
who
we
it
don't
was.
know, we don't know.
Well, it's not his signature's not there. We don't know.
Yeah.
But when Moshe writes something and says, God said, And it's in the first person and he's writing it, I have a lot of confidence in that.
What I did, let me tell you what I'm working on, this project that I'm working on. A lot of my passion is, I love the Torah, Genesis as we've received it, Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy 34:12. I particularly love Deuteronomy. And what I began to do in an English version, checking the Hebrew side by side, I downloaded a copy of the English book of Deuteronomy. I have the whole Torah, but just for this project. And whenever it seems to me, and somebody goes, well, who cares what you think, Ross? Well, that's fair. I'm okay if you think that. But what I wanted to do was look for evidence within the text where it clearly is a speaker or it's relating something in the third person versus something related in the first person. Now, here's something that is interesting. I challenge people to go to the Torah, Genesis 1:1 through the end of the book of Numbers, and find evidence of a first person usage there. In other words, if I open Leviticus, for instance, just say I open Leviticus, and here it is. Look, here it is. You saw me. I didn't plan this. Leviticus 23:33, and the Lord spoke to Moses.
Right.
Third person.
That's a narrator.
This is my view. Now, some people would go, no, Moses wrote like that times. Well, maybe. Okay, let's just flip to another chapter. How about 22, verse 26? And the Lord spoke unto Moses. Okay.
Now, wait a minute, but if you go to Deuteronomy, it says, and the Lord spoke unto me.
Exactly.
He didn't write like that.
Well, so
I mean, some people write like that about themselves.
Watch.
But
look, now I'm going to go back to 22, verse 17.
People don't write it all. I mean, I'm just
and
saying.
the Lord spoke unto Moses.
Yeah.
Here's chapter 22, verse 1. I'm going backwards. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, if I go back to chapter 21, verse 1, and the Lord said unto Moses, speak to the priest. If I go back to chapter 20, verse 1, and the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, if I go back to 19, you get the point.
Yeah,
right?
the point is that this wasn't Moses writing this down, basically.
Well,
That's
again, it seems less...
I mean, if it was written down like that.
It's written in a different style, I will at least say that.
Yeah.
And if you flip to Deuteronomy, though, you encounter, as far as my studies show, the only place where we have first person, chapter 2, verse 31, and Jehovah said unto me. Chapter 3, verse 2, and Jehovah said unto me. It's first person. Now, what does that mean? People could come up with different conclusions based on this.
It could mean it was written later. It could mean it was written at the present by somebody else. Somebody on narrative.
Now, critical scholarship scares some people.
Sure.
Like looking at it this close, because people have inherited certain understandings.
Right. Until King James Bible came along,
and even beyond
it was settled in, but I mean, I'm just saying.
But people have certain ideas that they've sort of inherited. Like this is, if you say who wrote the Torah, you go, well, Moses wrote the Torah. We have record of that. That's good, because we read it today, Deuteronomy 31. He wrote it, he finished it, he rolled it up. But that's not the end of what we call the Torah. So you see my question. Understand what I am actually searching for is the authentic Torah that Moses wrote and inscribed, he wrote it down and rolled it up and gave it. Now, how could we ever possibly hope to find that now? Is there a way to pull that from the text? And my view is yes. And it's based on Vicky. I saw Vicky made a comment. She's a careful student. And she said a good way to start would probably be paying careful attention to the white spaces and looking at the person, first person, second person, third person. How is it written? And it would at least incline you to make certain conclusions.
Well, in your writings, when you go back and do this, you can come out with the first edition that has Moses in his actual words in red.
Yeah, red lettered edition. Well, might have to pick another color, but you know, But the idea
Purple.
is how do you determine who said what? So I want people to think deeply, and everyone that knows me knows that I never say you have to believe exactly what I believe or you're not welcome here, because that wouldn't work.
This isn't like a secret thing you're trying to expose.
Yeah.
It's just, you know,
As a young student, many years ago, I did a lot of reading on Greek and Roman culture, and a few others, and on and those that were, I guess you'd call the human version of the Xerox machine for the Catholic Church. Well,
green letter edition.
a scribe, part of the duties and jobs of you write exactly what's dictated to you, just like a secretary, a stenographer, exactly what's dictated, or you copy exactly what's on a page that you're copying, and that gets reviewed and approved by, down the line by other reviewers of what you wrote, and if you messed up, you got to redo it, and that's how they had the quality assurance, if you will, to keep documents correct as they went down the line. Very tedious job because they didn't have erasers, there was no whiteout.
Well, and not only that, just to kind of add to that, the world of the scribes, especially when we look at the ancient Near East, and we look specifically at the Hebrew idea of the scribe, which does have similarities with the ancient Near East. What we see in the Hebrew, the word for scribe is sofer, one who counts, right? So they would literally, to ensure there are rules around this. So let's say if when you begin, you know how many letters are in the first line, and you count those letters, you duplicate this one to make a new copy. How do you verify that it's correct? You look at, make sure that you have 26 here, you have 26 here, whatever the case may be. There are checks in there which are meant to ensure that a scribe accurately transmits what it is that he's supposed to convey.
So that you're not, I guess what I'm saying is back then, scribes didn't have what writers do in modern era, which is literary license. They couldn't just wander off with a story anywhere they wanted to, or they wouldn't have their...
They wouldn't be called a scribe at that point.
They wouldn't have their job.
Right. Yeah. There'd be something else.
There'd be something else out there making little ones out of big ones, from big ones, you know.
Yeah.
So it's important as we begin to look at this that we let the Bible define itself according to its own terms.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I'm proposing is traditionally, and it's become part of the culture, if you say Torah, right? Everyone, for the most part, now let's not say, I won't be so inclusive, but most people will say, oh, you mean the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses. Notice how I said that, the 5 books of Moses. So people say, well, these are the books of Moses. It's the law.
It's ingrained in our head. And
my question becomes, everything has to go on the table. Look, I began my journey as a fundamentalist Christian. And as a fundamentalist Christian, I was told, this is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. It's the authoritative, inerrant-inspired Word of God.
Authorized.
There are no errors, yada, yada. And they held it up in the air and shook it and, pounded on it. And then what happens is people begin to study. I meet people mainly through correspondence. People will write me. They'll send me Facebook messages. Hey, I was this, now I'm this. I thought I was right, but I was wrong. Now I'm right, and I'm not wrong. And there is this view that we're searching for the ultimate truth in which there is no error, no problem, no difficulty. The text is perfect, and that's what we're seeking. What I'm going to begin to lay out is we do have some things that we have to consider. Point being made. Why did Moses say in Deuteronomy 3, the Lord was angry with me because of you? Is that what we read in Numbers chapter 27, in Deuteronomy chapter 32, in Deuteronomy chapter 34? The question becomes, the only way to look at this and fully get the picture is to begin to lay these texts out side by side. And during the break, I looked and Jodelle mentioned that she uses Excel. I happen to use Excel for this exercise too, because you can do it in Word. You could do it in handwritten copies on napkins if you want. But you write these similar stories and narratives side by side and you begin to look at them. And in addition to that, you pay careful attention to the switching of persons and so forth. So it's going to be fun as we work through these things, but I think I ultimately came up with this final series as we move to the end of Deuteronomy in the next couple of weeks. I wanted to call this, what did I call it? The final word. Let's see what I called
Period.
it. No, I called it something else. Hang on, I'm going to tell you. It was so good, I thought.
You didn't write it down, did you?
I did write it down, but I wrote it on YouTube. Here we go. Final words. End of the Torah. All right? Because what I wanted to do today was to introduce this idea a little bit more than I've done in the past, even though I've touched on it.
Sure.
I wanted to introduce this. What I'd like to do, I'm going to be in the wilderness for 7 weeks, teaching every Shabbat except one where I've got a guest speaker with Dave and Patty Tyler coming in. But during this unfolding, we're going to work through the Torah portions, and we're going to look very closely at these details as we work through. Look, I love the book of Genesis, and I think it is a chronicle of sacred history. Now, within that chronicle of sacred history, we learn about the foundations of the world and the creation and the beginnings of everything, the beginning of sin, the beginning of life on the planet, the beginning of the people of Israel. All of these stories, I believe, are sacred history that have been passed down. Do they represent what the Torah of Moses calls the Torah of Moses? You see the subtlety.
So we got the Torah of Moses. I'm going to throw a hypothetical question.
So what does Torah
to you.
stand for in English?
Hang on.
Yeah. So you got the Torah. No, you got the Torah of Moses, and then you got the Torah, and that includes the Torah of Moses. It's what do you call it? Embedded in there. Hypothetically, is the Torah finished? Is it through? Is it ended? Is it over with? Is it going to be ever be added to? That's a bad word to use, but I'm just saying.
Okay, so
is it complete?
You have different usages of the word Torah in the Torah.
Right.
Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy. You ask, what does it mean in English? Torah in English is translated variously. Most people say the law of Moses.
Instructions.
But it's instructions, exactly,
Instructions.
Dave. It means instruction. It's tied to this idea of aiming and throwing and shooting towards a target. So it's an instruction, though.
So that would be the instructions of Moses.
Yes. Now, what we also have is back in, for instance, in Genesis chapter 26, verses 2 through 5, it talks about how Abraham kept certain things. Let me show you. Let me give you an example. And this, I think, leads people to make some assumptions and miss some marks. So in Genesis 26, or at least make some leaps of faith, I should say. In Genesis 26, it says the following. God is talking to Isaac. in verse 2, chapter 26, Genesis, and Jehovah appeared to him and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell you of, sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and will bless you, for to you and to your seed I'll give all these countries. I'll perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father, and I'll multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and give to your seed all these countries, and in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Why? Because Abraham obeyed my voice, he listened to my voice, and kept my charge. In Hebrew, it's guarded my guarded things, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Now that last word, laws, is Torah in the plural. So in Genesis, we read that Abraham did what? It says he guarded my guarded things, my commandments, my statutes, and my instructions. Now what people do is they go, oh, there's the word Torah. It means he knew this is what they say.
But it's plural. Instructions.
They believe that this indicates that the Torah, Genesis 1:1 through 2, you see what I'm saying? Yeah. That the Torah was given to Abraham and passed down and so forth.
What that literally says to me is that God gave him charges, instructions, etc. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't know that they're the same charges and instructions that he gave to Moses.
Well, let me give you an example. In Deuteronomy chapter 29, when we did this Torah reading last week, watch this. Let's see if memory serves me right. Let's see. I'm looking for. I'm looking for where he says. Okay. Neither with you only do I make this covenant and this oath, but with him that stands here with us this day before Jehovah our God, also with him that is not here with us today. And he goes on to talk about, I'm looking for the passage where it says, I made not this covenant with our fathers. I'll find that in a moment. There are different covenants, and people tend to lump them together.
Before that.
Maybe it is, yeah. But that's what people do. And I think that they go a little bit too far with it.
Well, I mean, you can be literal, or you can be subjective with implying things into what's written.
It's the difference between the instruction,
and instruction,
or the instructions.
And there are individual Torahs too.
Sure.
Like, for instance, where it talks about this is the Torah of the king, or this is the Torah, this is the instruction.
So
of this,
what leads me to my thoughts, it's not in the Bible, this is not the book according to John or anything like that, although that sounds pretty cool. But anyway, Bob. That one's good. Is that somewhere in there, I believe, when they left Egypt and they were in the desert, there was a covenant that was made with Abraham about circumcision. I don't think they practiced that when they left Egypt.
Oh, we know they didn't. It says
so.
They did.
So.
All right, I got it.
The charges that were given to Abraham somehow didn't either they willfully didn't. You got two choices: they willfully didn't do it, or they didn't know,
or they weren't allowed to do it.
Well, but when you're in the desert and you're free of Egypt,
right?
But they either didn't know, they willfully didn't do it, or they just didn't know. Yeah.
Well,
until it was brought up to them.
We do know that during the wilderness, for instance, no one was circumcised. There's only one mention, for instance, of a Passover celebration kept in the wilderness. There's
I was just using that as an example.
No, but we have a reference in Joshua where it says that they didn't circumcise the whole time they were in the wilderness. That whole generation didn't do it. Now, here's what I was referring to. I apologize. It's Deuteronomy chapter 5. Dave straightened me out. You are right. It's before what I was going to. Verse 2, Jehovah our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Jehovah made not this covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us, who are all of us here alive this day. So it's, in other words, what people have tended to do is to go back and say it's the same, but that doesn't make sense. It is a revelation. So, for instance, the 10 words. We get the 10 words at Sinai. The 10 words, maybe in some form or fashion, were communicated in some way to a previous generation. At times we see some of these. But you know what we don't have? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall have no other out of the fiery furnace. That didn't happen yet.
I brought you out of the land of Canaan. It was a whole different scenario.
You have to look at
What verse was that?
Chapter 5, beginning in verse 2.
Which leads me... Oh, go ahead.
What is 29:1? I got one of the posters here.
That's where I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So somebody was just trying to help us out here.
Yeah.
Which leads me to believe that after 400 years of being subjugated, that at some point in time, you know, just the thought of how the books came to be, how the history, to get your history back, God would have had to have imparted this somehow, and it got written down because it just wasn't there. It wasn't there. They had nothing. They were rags.
Don't know.
You know.
Don't know.
There were no. There were no.
We have to go with.
There were no Jewish scribes back when they were in bondage.
You know about.
Well,
I mean, I'm probably with you.
If they did, they worked for the Pharaoh.
And there's that argument.
Probably so. You're probably right, but what I'm looking for, what are the clues from the text that looks a lot of speculation is probably.
And mine's pure speculation.
But a lot of mine is too. We're looking at something that most people aren't going to look at. This is a little bit tougher.
Yeah. This helps out a lot. I'm not a student. Never have been, probably never will be, of the so-called oral Torah, the passed down oral traditions and stuff. But it helps out in that area because it kind of fills in a blank there. You know, you have this obvious written down text. You know, at some point we do have the oldest copy and so on and so forth. They line up, but then we have a tradition of what the rabbis say about certain things, so it kind of helps out. I know it's later. I know it's much later.
Yeah.
But it kind of helps me understand why they did that, why they do the oral part of it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
well, it does if that's all you've got.
Well,
but the only problem with oral is that unless you keep it simple and straightforward, that over time it's going to change. It's like the old thing of being in the classroom and somebody whispers something in somebody's ear and it goes around.
Right.
And it wasn't anything like what you said.
What I'm doing just to clarify, this whatever anyone does with oral tradition or traditions is a separate thought because what I'm talking about, I want to know. What I'm curious about is what was written.
Yeah.
And only
the original,
what was written and rolled up and handed to the Levites to take care of.
The embedded Torah, so to speak. It's right in line with Barry's
scroll
work
that
on
fell out.
The embedded Torah as far as the priest and the
So the scroll that they found in the sacred place in the temple in Jerusalem, was that a copy of what was in the side chamber for the ark, or
I believe it could easily have been
might have been the
yeah. So that's the point. Is as this investigation unfolds, we're going to look at what evidence do we have from the text about this. Again, people theorize, and this is what I do and what we all do.
There's a lot to work with.
Yeah. So I want to know, what do we know? What can we find? And I want people, as they begin to look at this, to think about, is this written in the first person? Now, I'll be honest, the first exposure I had to critical textual studies was when I was in Christianity. And I remember one time I read a book on the book of Acts. Now, I grew up a good little fundamentalist. I mean, it was all God's Word, and it was all inspired, and And what this scholar proposed gave me pause. And here's what he said, as I recall. When we get to, and I'm using this analogy because it ties in, when we get to Acts chapter 16, there's something there that strikes us. It's known as the we document. It becomes almost what they call a travel log. And it sounds very authentic, like it was put into another document, the book of Acts as we now have it. But most scholars were viewing this as this is an authentic document. The rest of it is speculation. We don't know. But this seems authentic. Now, when I first read that, I said, this guy is nuts. He doesn't know that this is inspired, whatever.
Right.
But it made my mind begin to think, pay attention. When you read the text, pay attention. And I advise people all the time, we know that there weren't originally chapters and verses and things of that nature. It was just a flow of narrative or poetry or prose or whatever. And so these white spaces, though, indicate quite often a shift in person or thought. I gave an example today for those that followed closely. In Numbers chapter 27, beginning in verse 12, there's an account of which I based my class. Prior to that, we're talking about the daughters of Zelophehad. Zelophehad and the daughters, and they didn't have a son to pass their inheritance, or they were the sisters and there weren't brothers. So they had a legitimate question to Moses. They said, look, we found something here. There's no way that we can carry on our father's name according to the way you've got things written up, basically, right? And so he said, okay, well, let me talk to God about it. And God said, the daughters of Zelophehad are right. Let's go with their idea, that's right. It'll pass to them. Then you have this story.
And that became part of instruction.
It
Moses
did.
Long gone.
It did. And so that becomes part of the story. Then we have the story of Moses' last interchange with God. And then afterwards, right after that, it says, now here's some sacrifices for you, 28, 29, 30. You go into chapter 33, which is a travel log and so forth. What I want to do is, I'm curious, could we determine this? Could we find this? I think that using textual archaeology, if that's a phrase, sleuthing,
you can come
careful study.
You can come up with a hypothesis. You can. I don't know if you can ever prove without a shadow of a doubt. I don't know.
Yeah, shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, but you can definitely theorize this and opinionate it.
Yep.
Sure.
I think it's worth a look. And so over the next couple of weeks, my intention is to explore this subject matter as we close out the Torah. Today basically gives the end of the Torah. It says he finished it up and he wrote it to its end, he rolled it up, gave it to the Levites, and then we still have a little bit. But what do we have? We have the song, which was introduced and supposedly already taught to the children of Israel and all that. We're going to look at the lyrics of the song. We're going to cover more extensively the final words of God to Moses. We're going to look at the blessing. And then what we'll do is, as we roll into the Torah cycle again, my initial classes for the Torah cycle will come to you live from the desert of Israel. So I'll be in the wilderness for more than 40 days, which I think is quite inspiring and it's exciting for me. So we're going to be going through quite a bit. Now, I've never claimed to be a traditionalist, I saw Wade, I'll tell you, Wade has posted the teachings and classes on this list that he started, and there were some people in there that, immediately said, well, I don't want to listen to this guy. He's not an authentic.
Doesn't have any credentials.
Kosher. No, they just said I wasn't kosher.
Okay.
None of that really bothers me because I'm used to people who are they're they're very opinionated, and they.
How do you make a person kosher? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's like it's not.
I know you do that with beef, but
teaching.
it ain't pretty.
But if you're interested,
route.
if you're interested in pursuing studies at this level where we're looking at details of the text and we're trying to discern what it is that that we can gain from Scripture to live our lives in a more biblically authentic or authentically biblical fashion, that's what the goal is here. It's not just a matter of learning, but of learning to live. That's what I want to do, because ultimately, that's what we need to do.
I wanted to touch on something you said.
Okay.
As we go through these sort of things,
Mm-hmm.
some people will tend to be shaken
Mm-hmm.
and lose focus or sight. To me, all the stories in the Bible are an enhancement to learning to live a better way. The important part of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, to me, if I had to say, okay, this is the most important thing, it would be, to me, in the book of Deuteronomy, and it would be the giving of the 10 words and the instructions that Moses was directed by God to make plain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just make it simple, make it straightforward, put it on the table. Everybody, humans have a tendency, and you can see this with tradition, that they keep piling on until you can't remember what it was all about to start with. That God told Moses, make it plain.
Yeah.
Here's the 10 words, the 10 things I want to tell you, and then here's instructions. Make it simple that they can understand. And so if you put your arms around that, I don't think you can really go wrong. The rest of everything that you want to do is laudable and noteworthy and all that good stuff. But if you put your arms around that,
Well, in order to put your arms around that, you got to do what we're doing.
I understand.
That's all you.
So I
only way
understand,
you
but
can do it.
but if you have faith in those 10 things and in those instructions that they're real, then you're probably going to be okay, and this will help you be better.
Yeah, let me make one point. I see people are talking about Q. Let me just touch on it just briefly. A lot of people who've got into critical studies of the Gospels have heard of the Gospel of Q. Mm-hmm. What is the Gospel of Q? We know of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, but we don't know who Q is, right? So here is the nutshell.
Q source.
Here's the nutshell definition. Very easy.
Mm-hmm.
All right. First of all, the word quell is from the German. All right, and it means source. Mm-hmm. So here's the way they describe it. If you and people that don't like Christianity or whatever, bear with me because this is good academic understanding. You need to know this anyway. Matthew writes an account. Mark writes an account, right? And in Matthew and Luke, all right, in Matthew and Luke, where they have common material that's not in Mark, that's Q. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's what you have. You have Mark is common in both. In other words, Matthew, this is what scholars believe, that Matthew used Mark to write his gospel. Yeah. Luke said, Mark, let me use that. I'm going to use that to write my story too. So Matthew and
the other
Luke,
one didn't even know about it.
Matthew and Luke both use Mark. And you can tell where they used Mark because what they have in common that Mark has, they got from Mark. They also have a good bit of common material that Mark doesn't have. So you know what scholars did? They said, oh my goodness, we found a hypothetical, though a very well-attested hypothetical, by finding common material in Matthew and Luke that's not found in Mark. And so we are going to call this a source for information for Matthew and Luke that, so that's what that is. What I've decided in pursuing academically and looking at the text of the Bible, I want to leave no stone unturned. So one thing that benefited me way back in the day, I would take. Have you ever seen a harmony of the Gospels?
Mm-hmm.
This gave me the idea for what I'm doing. Where let's use an example from
Trying to make
Christian-
it all harmonized. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, when I look at, let's say because I'm writing my Jesus book right now, by the way, so I'm all into harmonies.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking at the feeding of the thousands or whatever, I say, where do we see that? Oh, it's got it in Matthew, it's got it in Mark, it's Luke, whatever. I look at those synoptics, the same things in each of those Gospels, and I notice peculiarities of each author. Now, to my knowledge, I've not seen a printed version, and it could be out there. If some of you listening have this, let me know. I'll buy it. But I've not seen where the stories of different episodes that are contained in the Torah are lined up side by side. Let me do one example.
Okay.
Deuteronomy 1. In Deuteronomy 1, and let's go to verse 22. Let me make sure I don't want to back up further than that. They're fixing to go into the land, supposedly. Let's see, verse 21. Behold, Jehovah your God has set the land before you. Go up and possess it, as Jehovah, God of your fathers, has said to you. Fear not, nor be discouraged. And you came near to me, every one of you, and said, we will send men before us, and they will search us out the land, and bring us back word by what way we must go up, into what city we shall come. And the saying pleased me well, and I took 12 men of you, one for a tribe, and they turned and went up to the mountain and came to the Wadi of Eshcol. And it tells the story of the spies, right? How did they get the idea? Whose idea was it? Right? If you read this, it says, you came near to me, every one of you, and said, hey, look, Moses, we're going to send spies into the land. Well, do we have any other episodes in Scripture of that account? Oh, we do. Thanks for asking, John. In Numbers chapter 13.
Wow.
In Numbers chapter 13, ready?
Okay.
And Jehovah spoke unto Moses, saying, send thou men that they may spy out the land of Canaan, which I give to the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall you send a man, every one a ruler among them. And Moses, by the commandment of Jehovah, sent them from the wilderness of Paran. All those men were head of the tribe. Now,
So you got to harmonize that. How are you going to harmonize that?
You have to understand, all right, the first thing we have to do is look at similar stories and compare them and contrast, if necessary, to see what it is that we want to truly get at. So what I do is I know that Deuteronomy 1, 22 and following contains the story of the spies. I know Numbers chapter 13. I'll put them side by side and I'll look at the details. Now, some of you might say, good Lord, I ain't got time to do all that. Well, people have time to do whatever they have time to do, but this is what
wait on
I'm
the book.
looking
That's all I can say.
at. Huh?
Wait on the
You just
book.
got to wait on the book.
Yeah. So anyway, it is a wonderful study. It is enlightening. It is informative. I am a very strong believer in our Creator and in His instructions, and I want to find out all that I can learn from this particular story.
So you can use that method to try to pull out some of the Torah,
Yep.
authentic Torah. You want to call it that?
It takes every tool in our tool
And then
bag.
you're going to use the first person, second person.
Yep.
Is there anything else? Is there any other
White
help?
spaces are
spaces?
key
Trying
sometimes.
to think of anything
You know,
else.
the other thing, too, is some things are taken for granted. Now, Moshe spent a lot.
Common sense.
Well, no, he spent a lot of time, one-on-one time,
Sure.
with the creator of the universe. That had to impart some
Oh, yes,
innate knowledge,
Yeah.
and I mean, he learned from the creator. So
He did a lot of Up
So
in the middle of
the
nowhere,
one document says, "Hey," and Moses said, I've found out that each one of these tribes, you guys are going to send spies in." Moses is saying, "Hey, basically let's make a coordinated effort." Now, they'd already fought at least two wars.
Oh, we've had all kind of
No,
stuff.
no, Moses has already fought two wars since they've been out there in the desert.
Oh, yeah.
So military stuff is not a foreign language to them. So they're told, you're going to go down in here and you're going to take over this place and it's inhabited. Well, what's the first thing a military person? Well, we need to reconnoiter.
I got you. But again, yes, all of that is a
But
given.
that type of knowledge and things that
I got
Moses
that.
gets.
No. That's separate.
Yeah.
This is a question of, did it happen this way? Hey, Moses, we want to send 12 men
Right.
into the land and spy it out. Or another way.
God says,
God
send
said,
10
Moses,
Right. That's what I'm pointing out. Numbers says God told Moses to do this.
are both right in revealing separate stories?
'Cause they
Or
seem to be
is one
opposing
right or
each
one
other.
wrong? This is not meant to shake anybody's faith.
No.
This is meant to say we have to look at all the available sources within the sources and see what we can do
Without
to line it
apologizing.
out. Your point is exactly on. If you've encountered opposing forces thus far and you know that you're going to take this place, you have some questions to ask. Hey, if we're going to go in, are there walled cities? Are they inhabited by lots of people? Are they big? Are they strong? Are they whatever?
And because of his personal relationship, we got more people on the third person may be inclined to attribute everything that comes from Moses' mouth as coming from God.
Well, in Numbers 13, for instance, it says,
Because they told him, you go talk to God. We don't want to talk to him anymore. He scares us. So you just tell us what he says and we'll do it.
Right.
So they
So-
set the
I follow
foundation for that.
so we're
Everybody-
going to go through some things like this.
Everybody might not have known that God told him to go do that. He just
Yeah.
assumed.
It might
Again,
have. I know.
I think we all went to Moses first, didn't we? You know, you know how that story goes. You whisper one thing to one person, they to another person.
Exactly.
Again, I think if I thought, like, I wouldn't go to a bunch of people who've never looked at the Bible and say, hey, we're going to tackle this.
Right.
No, that'd be a no.
It would be bad. But with people who seek to live their life according to Scripture and who have burning questions, like, I want to know.
Yeah.
Like, I started off and I didn't know, and I wanted to know, and so it brought me to this point. I want to continue to
There
know.
might be some studies like this, similar to this, that a person might want to try to figure out sacrifices. Some might want to figure out kingship. What do you think you're trying?
Things like that.
What's
that
the
we
goal
just,
here?
That we just talked about. It's nice to know. Does it affect your faith? Whether Moses had the concept of doing this and organizing it because the 12 tribes are going to do it independently, or whether God told him to.
What drives
Does
me?
it really? In that particular manner? Does that really matter?
What drives me is what drove these guys looking, Dave, to answer your question.
Yeah.
They found by careful study within gospel material, they at least proposed a source that we no longer have.
Okay. Okay.
I'm looking for the source within the Torah.
Gotcha.
And the
Right.
only way to
Right.
do that is to look at similar stories in separate accounts and look for, did this part, like, I'll give
agree.
you one example I read today. Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 48 through 52, gives almost word for word the same thing we read in Numbers 27, verses 12 and following. Go up into this mountain of Avarim, into the Mount of Nebo, and so forth. I can take that, copy and paste into one column, take Deuteronomy 34, verse 48 through 52, 32, verse 48 through 52, copy it in, and I can look at them side by side and go, wow, look at this. Is this the same event? Or is it an identically acted event in separate times, or what is it? So bear with me, because it's a passionate study. Now, I'm not going to do this exact method every week, but what I wanted to get at over the next few weeks is, how does the Torah wrap itself up at the end? What do we see in, say, the final words of Moses, the final words of God? We're going to be exploring the song, the blessing, and ultimately the way it wraps up is Moses is dead. You know, Joshua begins, God tells Joshua, Moses, my servant, is dead. No miraculous
Somebody's got to go away so somebody else can come in.
Yep. Yeah.
That's kind of a biblical thing.
Nobody, when you read that, it's like he didn't come back. He's not coming back. He's dead.
I wonder if they wouldn't look for him.
I don't know.
Apparently they did because
120
nobody knew.
It says nobody could
Yeah,
find
if nobody cared, then they wouldn't wrote that. They must have sent a search party.
120 years old.
Karina asked a
come
question. Ross, would you recommend Richard Friedman's book, Commentary of the Torah? Absolutely. Absolutely. It comes in paperback. Sure. I've worn out probably 3 of them. I have 2 that are in decent shape. I highly recommend it. And I recommend Friedman, even if you don't agree with his conclusions, he's got some incredible material out there. He's a very able scholar. He's an academic, right? So he doesn't teach, that I know of, he doesn't teach every Saturday morning, but I would say that he's got some really good stuff.
He comes across good. I like
in fact, in my shelf up here, I don't know if they can see that, but I've got at least 2 of Friedman's books up there on that special little shelf there.
So when you're working on this in the desert, if you get a hint from the copper scrolls on where the ark may be, my daughter says she'll quit what she's doing. We'll be right over to help you go look for it.
All right.
Well, there's a lot of holes in the hills over
I'll
there.
bet you.
Yeah. Well, one other thing then before we leave, since you mentioned the Ark of the Covenant.
Tell her to bring some good shoes, because, man, look, lots of rope.
Let's see.
Some goats.
And it shall come to pass, when you multiply and increase in the land in those days, says Jehovah, they shall no more say, the Ark of the Covenant of Jehovah.
There you go.
Nor shall it come to mind, nor shall they remember it, nor shall they miss it, nor shall that be done anymore.
Well, nor shall they remember it.
So,
kind of bothers me.
It becomes an archaeological find at that point.
Yeah.
Well, you won't
But
remember.
if I do find it, I'll call you.
If you find it,
or get a clue as to where we go dig.
But according to the scripture, if you do find it, you're going to go, what is this? I don't remember this.
Yeah. I don't even know what this is.
What is this?
I just put the Indiana Jones movie on it.
I don't know.
Hey, those are good movies. Hey, look, it's a beautiful day here. I know it's rainy in some of our audience's area.
Holding down the fort, hoping they don't lose
And,
electricity.
Dave and I and John, we here in Louisiana particularly, and I guess all the Southeast are very familiar. And I know you've had storms too. And I pray that everything is okay and that you don't suffer anything too unbearable. I know that Wade also mentioned asking for prayer as they hunker down and others. So we do have you in our prayers. If you live on that East Coast and you're dealing with the rain, we pray that things go well for you as well as can be expected. Keep us in touch if you have electricity. Let us know on the United Israel Facebook group page, you know, as you have needs or whatever, and it could be that some of our audience is close enough to give you help or whatever. I mean, we ended up having to do that here.
Facebook's proved several times how a good resource in a storm. People lose power and stuff, they still can communicate with Facebook. Oddly enough, that was one of our main deals in the storm.
Look, Dave and I, you know, even people that say, I hate Facebook and Zuckerberg and all that, and I don't even know how it was working sometimes. We wouldn't have hardly any service. You couldn't make phone calls. You couldn't send text messages. The only way we were able to correspond in that bad storm was through Facebook Messenger. So we tell everybody, look, I don't know if it works for you, but it did for us. So it's worth a shot.
Thankfully, I sent a text to the spokesperson for the Cajun Navy telling them that our prayers go with them. They mobilized, and they're sending a lot of people out from Texas and Louisiana over there that had already been staged, waiting to go in and help. And they're doing, once again, doing a fabulous job to help out.
Yep. And a lot of people are doing that. They're mobilizing groups from all over to go help. So hopefully you have plenty of food and rations to make it through in case you do get kind of stranded. But we look forward to our next class. Join us next Saturday. Sometimes these dialogues, we get into all sorts of crazy stuff. It's not scripted, as if I had to tell you that. Yeah.
If we planned it, we wouldn't do it this way.
Yeah, that's right.
Like
That's
Bob
right.
the Levite. Yeah.
Yeah, Bob the Levite.
So, but if you found today's class that I taught helpful, you can share that on Facebook or YouTube, and let people know. There are going to be follow-up classes to this, and I'm really looking forward to. And I'll get Anna and some of our friends. I saw Derek come on a little while ago, but maybe Eric can. Derek can get Anna. Or I can go straight to Anna and just leave my buddy Derek out. He's probably busy anyway. But maybe get a graphic to let people know that we're going to be going with our Torah portions. We're going to kick off fresh in the desert, in the wilderness, where I'll be for 7 weeks. At the end of that 7 weeks, I'm going to go to the Tanakh tour. And so you're going to be there. Dave and Sherry are going to be there. John and Lyndon. We have other people that will be there as well. Dave and Patty Tyler.
And you're still going to be making every attempt to keep up on the bulletin.
Oh, yeah. Bulletin's still a go. I will tell you one other real fun thing, just because you're my friends and I can share this with you. When I land, thanks to James Tabor, James said, hey, when you get there, why don't we check with Simca's schedule, Simca Yakubovich, and see if he's free, and maybe you can meet with him. And I said, yeah, okay, that's great. So James wrote him. He immediately wrote back. He said, man, when you land, tell me your flight time. I'll have a driver pick you up, bring you to my house. And so I'm going to be going to Simca's house for the first day of Sukkot. I'm going to spend the night in his sukkah, go to synagogue with him. It's going to be fun, and then
get an autographed picture we can put on the wall.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
I like some of his stuff.
Yeah, he's fun. So anyway, but look, have a beautiful Sabbath the rest of the day. Shavua Tov. Have a beautiful week, and we'll see you same time, same channel, 10:30 a.m. Central Standard Time, right here on Facebook, YouTube. And I'll post this class as well as the audio link on our website, unitedisrael.org. So thanks a lot. Shalom, shalom.